This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of The Grey Joggers by Succulent Nurturer, composed by Burning Aurora. The day Remus came home with them, he'd been out shopping with Fabian all afternoon. Already annoyed that the stupid git had occupied his precious Remus time, Sirius was pouting in his room until the tall, fluffy-haired boy stuck his head through his bedroom door. A quiet
"Come on, Pads,"
was all it had taken to lure him out to the front room, Remus facing the counter and making tea for them both. Dressed in pale gray joggers that still had the size sticker on the thigh and a plain white t-shirt, Sirius took the opportunity to drink in the vision that was Remus Lupin, chewing on his lip as he watched broad shoulders flex as he moved easily around their shared space. The urge to wrap himself around his friend's back was strong, as was the urge to nose into the damp, soft-looking hair at the base of his neck. Slumping down into the soft sofa cushions, his breath whooshed from his chest as Remus turned to him, mugs in his hands, and took careful steps towards him. It felt like it was happening in slow motion, the gentle steps, the squat to place the mugs on the coffee table, the pop back up so he was standing straight once more. All the while, Sirius's eyes were fixed on the other boy's crotch. The material left nothing to the imagination, and it was clear Remus had foregone pants after his shower with how his soft cock was outlined.
Fuck.
He'd always known it was a possibility, considering how tall Remus was. Of course his dick would be proportional to his body, of course. He just didn't know how he was supposed to function when he was this close, and he wanted it so much.
"So, Fabe and I were thinking we could go strawberry picking before we break up for summer."
That'll do it,
he thought, the reminder of Fabian's existence adding insult to injury. It seemed to be mutual, their attraction, the tension between them building ever since the infamous Remosaurus Rex incident. Now they were in a strange limbo, unspoken feelings beginning to escape and blur the lines of their already questionable friendship. Those lines got blurrier when Remus wore the Grey Joggers. At least twice a week he was privy to the exquisite torture that was Remus John Lupin wearing the Grey Joggers. Sometimes, after he'd snuck into Remus's bed following a nightmare, he would wake up to find that Remus had been wearing the joggers all night. Other times, the boy would wander into the kitchen first thing, a yawn forcing his jaw wide open, happy trail proudly on display as the material sat low on his hips. On one memorable occasion, when he'd been taking a bath and Remus had wandered in to keep him company, the steam had soaked into the fabric enough that they clung to every inch of him. Every inch. He had been unable to speak as he was wrapped up in his favorite fluffy towel, his mouth opening and closing comedically as he tried to parse together at least one intelligible thought. As confident hands rubbed over his body, all he could do was try to avoid an erection at the sight of Remus's clothed cock. He was so pathetic, lusting over Mooney like a man dying of thirst. But God, what he'd do for a tall drink of Remus John. It helped somewhat that he'd begun to notice Remus spending longer than any friend should watching him, chewing at his plump lower lip absent-mindedly as his eyes tracked over his arse. In those few moments, it was nice to catch him, to see his cheeks turn pink and watch him try to pretend he hadn't. That moment in bed, the first time they got off together, Remus had been wearing the joggers, the outline of his hard cock egging Sirius on as he rubbed himself off against his Mooney's hip. And then, God, when he'd pushed the waistband down to finally show Sirius what he was working with. Remus had taken himself in hand and smoothed a practiced hand down his shaft. He was so fucking hot, and the years of sexual frustration that the soft gray fleece had contributed to played a not insignificant role in how quickly his climax approached. When dry fingers probed at his rim, all he could do was fall apart, Remus's litany of moans encouraging him over the edge. Taking a deep breath, as he watched Remus stroke his cock at a furious speed, he tentatively let his hand cover Remus's and asked,
"Show me what to do."
In the days, weeks, months that followed, he couldn't see his boyfriend wearing the joggers without reliving their first time together. As Remus's thigh slid between his legs, the rasp of his voice meeting his ears.
"Hot enough to break you."
A plan forming in his mind, He teased his fiancée for a few minutes before he pushed him backwards, words escaping him even as he surveyed Remus's frame, from his messy hair and swollen lips to the sizable bulge in his trousers.
Not a fucking chance.
With that, he left their bedroom, making it back to their ever-patient friends just as an irritated
"Bite me, Lupin,"
escaped his fiancée's tightly wound mouth. With a shimmy of his hips and a smile on his face, he settled into the sofa. He felt smug, to have such an effect on the boy he'd wanted for so long, loved for so long. And smug because in just a few short months, he'd be able to call him his husband. People would introduce them as the Lupins. He'd have 2 official families, not just one. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of discussing bridesmaids' dresses, color schemes, and then in swans Remus, smug smirk fixed to his face and half-hard cock dressed up in gray jogging bottoms. The noise he made was unintelligible, somewhere between a choke and a whine as Remus stretched deliciously in front of all of them, Marlene and Alice barely giving him a second glance before continuing on their conversation. The same could not be said for Sirius. No, instead he tried to focus on keeping his heart rate down, even as his eyes trailed over pale skin and defined muscle. Maybe Remus didn't still swim like he had 2 summers ago, but he did haul his fiancée around like he weighed nothing at all. Because of that, his chest was thick with muscle that made itself known when he tensed, just like he was doing now. Softly curling chest hair covered his pectorals, his abdomen and the sensitive skin which led to his cock, and Sirius's mouth watered to be able to suckle at the skin once more. It had only been a week, but being told he couldn't have what he wanted made him want it that much more. The straw that broke the camel's back, as it were, was the slow but distinct twitch of his shaft that occurred when Sirius licked his lips absent-mindedly. With a wild groan, he pounced, not an ounce of shame that he was losing himself to lust this way in front of their friends. It was, after all, their flat. They could leave if they didn't want to show.
"Good morning, husband."
Remus's gravelly morning voice woke him, Sirius blinking blearily until his husband came into focus. His husband. His husband. His husband, who was wearing those gray fucking joggers.
For fuck's sake.
He groaned, rolling onto his back with his forearm covering his eyes so he didn't subject himself to the image of Remus John Lupin looking like the perfect pre-breakfast snack.
"What, pads?"
Sirius could hear the smirk in his tone, picture the look on his face. This was a perfectly orchestrated seduction attempt from a man who knew it would take nothing more than a gentle breeze to fell his partner.
"Sirius,"
Remus sang as he straddled the older man's hips.
No.
"No."
Remus asked teasingly, pressing his lips to Sirius's collarbone and then suckling the skin between his teeth.
"What do you mean, no?"
You're so mean to me.
He whined, finally lifting his arm from his face to see his husband grinning at him, tempting forearms resting either side of his head.
You know what the Grey Joggers do?
With a little laugh that puffed minty breath over his face, Remus confessed.
"I let Prongs pack my overnight bag, so I don't think this one can be blamed on me."
Fuck.
"That's what I was hoping for."
Remus wiggled his brows.
"It is, after all, what is expected of newlyweds."
Is that right, Remus John Lupin?
"That's right, Sirius Orion Lupin."
Grinning into the kiss, Sirius made his peace with that fact that those gray joggers would be torturing him for the rest of their lives. It was, after all, the most exquisite pain. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora.